And let me pass the floor to Шарон Белензон, who will introduce his ideas on corporate entrepreneurship and intellectual property. And Sharon, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much for inviting me to talk about innovation today. I'm a professor at Duke. I've been with Duke for 6 years, but I've been studying innovation since essentially 2006, so 2003 actually, so 10 years. I'm going to take a very different approach than my colleague here. I'm going to talk to you about maybe the broadest question you can ask in this space, and I'm going to summarize maybe like 50 years of research in 5 minutes. So I try to kind of be brief, but maybe I speak a bit too fast. If there are questions, I'm happy to follow up when we finish. So the big question that I think that we want to understand in business scholarship, people that care about innovation, is where are the best ideas come from? Do they come from small firms, or do they come from large firms? So AT&T was mentioned here. AT&T, a great source of corporate R&D in the US. Many companies like that, IBM's, the best GEs, all the companies we know. We typically call this the golden age of American corporate R&D, where the large companies in the US have huge labs. They hire many scientists, and those scientists produce this amazing innovation. However, today, this is why I guess we have this summit, we know that many of the best ideas are generated by small firms. This is why large companies create those units, corporate venture capital, trying to identify those opportunities, realizing that now we engage in an open innovation system. Realizing that maybe the best ideas do not necessarily come from the huge labs American companies have built over time. So essentially to understand, so let's kind of look at the, so the kind of a picture on top. It's hard to kind of point because you cannot see what I'm pointing on. But just look at the picture on top. This is a picture that essentially is very important in our field because it shows something quite striking. It shows that from the 80s, what really happened was that the share of R&D, of industrial R&D, can I stand up? Do you mind if I stand up? Take the mic.
That's the real professor, but you need to take the mic.
Where's the mic? No, I have to, or because they cannot ask it. So essentially what we find if you look at this figure, we see that the share of corporate R&D, which is done by small firms has increased drastically over time, which raises a very important question. Now we can go back. Which raises a very important question: how can we nowadays support a system where a big part of the innovation is done by small firms that do not necessarily have the capabilities of commercializing those technologies? And this is a big question that we try to understand, because if you are a large company, if someone comes to you, if you are a Lucent, someone comes to you with an idea, then obviously Lucent itself can not only generate the ideas, but if it is successful, it knows how to build a business which is going to create $100 million in revenue, etc. A small company does not necessarily know how to do that. So to support a system where a big part of your R&D is organized in small firms, you need to develop institutions that would allow those companies to exchange, to sell, to trade their inventions with large firms. This is a critical concept. We call this concept a division of innovation, of innovative labor. Actually, division of labor is something which is even broader than innovation. Everyone will specialize in what he does best, and then we are going to develop markets that would allow us to trade. And everything in this space today talks about what are the institutions which have been developed in the US, maybe only in the US, that allows small firms to flourish so much. Now, I don't know how long I have. I lost track of time, but I'm going to kind of risk it and going to talk to you about
3 minutes.
How much? How long? 3. That's a long time. So let's go back to the future. And actually, when you think about, where did we find the most important inventors, small firms? It was in 1850. Not today. Go back to Edison, Stanley, Sperry, Westinghouse, Thomson. These were amazing inventors that changed the world. They invented the inventions that essentially were the source of growth in the US, and they were independent firms. These guys did not know how to build those companies. What did they do? You can just look at this graph. It shows you the share of patents that were traded between small firms and large firms. And you see it in the US, unlike in the UK, the bar with the small circles, this was a huge number. These guys, what they did, they sold their inventions to large companies. In 1850, many years ago, where we didn't have many of the institutions we have now, small firms were very important. But then something happened. In 1900s, the role of small inventors in the US sharply declined. Maybe I'll stand up here. And then what we saw was that the large companies in the US, large companies of the US started to take the role, started to build huge labs, and started essentially to take the role of independent inventors. And independent inventors started to decline in terms of their importance in developing, essentially in generating R&D or the big inventions in the US. Okay? And we call it the rise of the corporate R&D in America. And this is the period of AT&T, the big kind of Bell Labs, etc. These guys sucking up all the talent in America, organizing, putting them in a very large lab, and essentially asking them to generate all the inventions. Fantastic. So now we are in a world where all the big inventions come from large firms. But this phenomena did not last long. And from the 40s, these labs, AT&T, all these labs that we know started to really falter. They didn't really do very well. One example is DuPont. DuPont is known to have invested lots of money in basic research. The only invention they made, which was kind of commercially viable, was a nylon. Other than that, all the basic research completely failed. And now we go back to the present. And today, we are in a situation where small inventors are starting to be important as well. Or essentially are, as I showed you at the beginning, are important now as they were in 1850. And essentially, let me just show you one last slide. You can look at the graph below. This graph essentially summarizes lots of work in this space that shows that these are the licensing revenues coming from technology, from technology licensing between firms. And you see that this exchange, this contractual exchange of technology between firms has drastically risen over time. Meaning that companies now share technologies, and many of this is essentially licensing of technologies from small firms to large firms. So what I'm trying to tell you now is essentially, and this is not the only thing, we have alliances, trading in patents, contracts R&D, I don't have time to talk about all this stuff, but lots of market transactions. We have this specialization of innovation. It's not that large companies hire the best people, they do the R&D, they commercialize, no. Now innovation takes place in many different forms, many different structures, and we have markets that facilitate exchange. How are we different from the 1850s? Today we have many new institutions that did not exist back in the 1850s. Those institutions, or if I can, I don't have much time, so I need to finish. Let me emphasize one thing which is different between now and 1850. And I think in my view, this is the most important thing: the strength of property rights. When you were small, back in the day, like the 1850, for example, you didn't really have a strong patent protection that can essentially help you, protect you, and allow you to trade your technology with others. And still, people did that quite a bit. Today, patent protection is very, very strong. Actually, it reached a level where it may be too strong, or some people argue it is too strong in the US. Where actually we give too much power to small inventors, and maybe this power comes at the expense of the ability of large firms to innovate as well. So what I'm trying to say is, let me summarize with one sentence. I think I'm out of time. Where innovation comes from is a very difficult question. When we look at the 150s, years back, and look at the history of the US, we see that essentially this answer, sometimes it is for small inventors, then it started with small inventors, went back to large firms, now it is small firms as well. What is critical to understand is that if you want to have a structure where you allow companies to essentially divide their innovation labor or the innovation activity, where you realize that maybe the best thing to do is for those who are great in inventing is just to innovate, and those who are great in commercializing is just to commercialize. For that to happen, you need to develop market institutions. You need to develop institutions that will allow this level of specialization to take place. The US has done a great deal in developing those institutions. Some would argue maybe too much. But this, I think, is if I look at Russia, I think if you do want to go to a space where small firms flourish, this is what you need to think about, and maybe property rights or intellectual property rights is a major thing I would is the thing I would think about first. So
Thank you, Sharon. And finally, I wanted to shoot you a question. Even though
How long will they go?
let's not mention it. So basically, given that the majority of the audience is represented by the representatives of large corporations, so from the point of view of this scholar, what would be the best way for the large corporations to suck in the best ideas from the market today, given your story?
So I think what I can tell you now, based on research, based on evidence, large companies, based on evidence, okay? Large companies do not get much returns from doing basic research themselves. So you mentioned AT&T, the Bell Labs. There are no evidence suggesting that those guys making all this huge investment in hiring all these engineers were able to get money out of it. So the evidence suggests that what you want to do, you want to do the scientists do the science outside the firm, and then essentially either license, buy, and do all the stuff that essentially venture capitalists or CVCs do these days. Now there are many different models of essentially supporting this, what we call open innovation systems, from classical equity stakes in many, taking equity stakes in many firms, designing tournaments. So I think what I would like to emphasize in response is that evidence suggests that the best or the kind of more basic, fundamental ideas do not come from large companies today.
Thank you so much. Thank you.